Okay, we are continuing on Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, Siman Ayin Dalet, and we started really the preface, the Hakdama of Mishna Berurah in Biur Halacha, counting 5 different elements of erva, 5 different halachot and categories that we have when encountering what's called halachic erva, nakedness, and we're going to see the differences of those categories as we develop the sugya. Now, the second half of Biur Halacha, we did not really read and explain. The Pri Megadim, he brings that even if a person does this, of course, because there's no maaseh, you don't get malkut in the time of Beit HaMikdash even. You don't get lashes for this averah of reading something in front of the erva, but nevertheless, chayav makat mardut. It would get lashes midarabanan, upasul avur ze leedut midarabanan. This is a serious offense to the degree that a person becomes pasul leedut. If a person is called upon to be an ed in the chuppah, right? They always it's pretty important to make sure you have kosher edim, and to render somebody not proper for edut. Unfortunately, it's pretty easy in this generation. Someone that's not careful with their eyes in this way, and especially if they know the halacha and they're not as careful, they could be rendered with Rabbanan Pasul Edut. So that's something important. There's a Seif called that used to be Minage Eretz Yisrael Rabbi Aaron ben Shimon Shara Mafked. He says the Minagi in Shalayim was the rabbi would ask by Gitin at least the 2 edim right before they did it, and say you should be meharher b'tshuva, should do a little proper tshuva in order to be kasher le'edut prior to starting the process to make sure that everyone is kasher le'edut. So something important to think about, and says the Biur Halacha, do you have to go back and say Shema again if you did it? Yesh lomar the Talia Bazeh. It depends really in the machloket, the famous machloket in Masechet Temurah, machloket Rav and Abaye. Kol milta de Amar Rachmana lo tavid yavid lo mehani. Rava holds that if Hashem says don't do something and you do it, your actions don't really count. And in that case, in a safek of Torah, that your eyes were exposed to erva, that would perhaps be something that you have to go back and say Shema again, which again is the discussion of the Biur Halacha here. Without further ado, we want to start quickly reading the first Seif of Shulchan Aruch here, which we read and translated, but didn't really get to explain. So, Hayaya Hashem Aron betalito, Salech lachotz betalit al libo ve'azikra. If you are sleeping with your talit and you are not covered, you're naked under the blanket, Sarich lachotz betalit al libo. You have to cover your heart, and then you can read Shema. Mishum de libo ro'eh et ha'erva, because your heart, so to speak, is exposed to your erva, and therefore it will be asur. And the Rama adds in over here that the same halacha would apply actually if your heart is seeing ervat chavero, somebody else's erva, that would also be included in this halacha as well. And the Mishna Berurah writes in Seif Katan Dalet, Mishum de libo ro'eh et ha'erva, the erva bere'iyat rachmana. The pasuk says lo yira'eh becha ervat davar, which means the nakedness should not be seen. Umatzinu leshon re'iyah belev, and we find in the psukim that the heart of a person, also the verbiage of re'iyah, of sight, has been mentioned by it. Lefichach hechmiru chachamim bazeh. Therefore, chachamim vermachmir. Now, this already is telling you that this is not a biblical level of isur. It's not talking about the Oraita, it's talking about the Rabbanan. Libo ro'eh et ha'erva is the Rabbanan. It's not like your eyes are exposed to it. Your eyes are outside the blanket. Your eyes are not seeing any erva. But libo ro'eh et ha'erva is in isur the Rabbanan. the Ben Ish Chai writes that your head also should be, we discussed this in the Sugya when we learned Masechet Brachot, Daf Chaf Dalet, I believe we discussed this, that you have those Achronim, Ben Ish Chai included, that your head also should not be Ro'eh et ha'erva when you're saying Kriyat Shema or you are Osek b'Torah. So therefore, even if your eyes are covered, but your head is exposed to the erva, that would be also a reason to refrain from saying Divrei Torah or saying a bracha. Now, what's the reason for it? The Ben Ish Chai writes, because the heart of a person is the source of a kavanah. Your heart is the source of feeling that the person has. And Kabbalistically speaking, and in the Psukim also, you see Liba Bina Uba Halev Mevin, Zohar HaKadosh says, Shlomo HaMelech says, Natat alav decha lev chacham u'mevin. So you see that lev, the heart of a person, is associated with understanding and so on. It's the feelings that the person has, the kavanah that the person has, is all dependent on the heart, and therefore the Shekhinah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu resides with a person's heart, says the Ben Ish Chai. And Chachamim, because of this, were machmir, and they added that at the time that the person is osek b'kriyat Shema and divrei Torah, his heart also should not be exposed to the erva, should not be seeing the erva. So says the Mishna Berurah, if the person's erva is exposed, then many of the people, many of the poskim rather, they have agreed that this becomes an isur from the Torah. We skipped a little bit around because this is a longer Seif Katan. Dalet is a long Seif Katan, but this is talking about the afilu libo mechuse bebeged lafsik beno leerva sarich sheteh ervato gam ken mechusa. This is the other element that we mentioned in the Hakdama of Biur Halacha, that even if your eyes are covered, your head is even outside the building, but your erva is exposed, that if somebody would be there, would see it, it's exposed to the outside, then would be an isur by itself. And the Havetz Chaim here brings that many poskim agree that this could even be a isur d'oraita, because the pasuk says lo yira'eh, it doesn't say lo tir'eh ervat davar, doesn't say lo don't see ervat davar, it says lo yir'eh becha, right? It shouldn't be seen. So we read lo yira'eh, it's like not only that you shouldn't be seeing, but it shouldn't be seen in you ervat davar shetehe mechuse be'inyan shelo yuchal lehera'od afilu la'acher. They should be covered in a way that other people cannot see it if they would be there. Even though that no one necessarily is there, but if it's open, that would be perhaps a Torah level of erva. Just like when a person's eyes are exposed to erva, this could also be a question that would be a level of biblical midoraita, not a just mere drabanan. Even if it's at night. At night. Nobody says pitch black, is dark. That even if another person would have been there, could not have seen it. Chacham writes, it's still asur because of gilu yerva. It has nothing to do with actual sight. Just like when nobody is there, it's still asur because you're exposed. Even at night when it's pitch black, if you are actually exposed and not covered, that is called lo yira'eh becha ervat davar, right? That is seen, and therefore it will be a problem of exposing erva. Therefore, you cannot say bracha in that situation either. Now in Seif Katan Hey, the Mishna Berurah writes by ro'eh et ha'erva that the last piece of Maran, Mishum de libo ro'eh et ha'erva, that you're under the cover without any garments, even though that your body is covered, but your heart is exposed to see the erva. Says the Mishna Berurah, Od muchach sham de kriyat shema chozer im birchotea That if you said Shema like that, even though that this is a rabbinic level of a transgression, you would go back and say Shema, and not only Shema, but you say the brachot of Shema also, if you read the brachot and Shema with being exposed like that under the cover, because that's the tikkun of Chachamim. Now, Chacham Obadiah does not agree with this. And this again falls in line with a lot of other halachot that we have discussed, many of them so far, when it comes to saying the brachot, because the Isur of Liboro et Harva is the Rabbanan. The Isur of a bracha, saying a brachot Kriyat Shema is a potential Doraita if it's bracha she'ena sricha. So because of a rabbinic thing, I'm not going to have you go back and say the brachot, which will be a safek bracha she'ena sricha, which will be bracha lebatala. Therefore, Chachamim says go back, say the Shema part, but without the brachot of Kriyat Shema, because of safek brachot la'akel. And even though the Kaf HaChaim doesn't say this clearly, but it seems from the Kaf HaChaim also in the same line with Chacham Obadiah. Now, the Mishna Berurah brings in that same Seif Katan Hey from Chaye Adam. Chaye Adam, as we mentioned before many times, it was the mechutan of the Vilna Gaon. Their kids married each other. So one of the tremendous poskim, he was considered basically the Kitzush Ha'aruch of the Ashkenazim for many, many years. Even nowadays, there are some people still using Chaye Adam and Chochmat Adam as Kitzush Ha'aruch, a tremendous, tremendous sefer. So it says the Chaye Adam, it says the Mishna Berurah, mashma, it seems from Chaye Adam, the yesh la'akel b'diavad gam le'inyan tefillah b'davar the yisur hu dak midrabanan. That if you have an isur d'rabanan that you transgressed, even by tefillah, which in itself is the Rabbanan, you could be mekel, right? So it says, in other words, says the Mishna Berurah, it says, the afilu b'di'evet im kara kriyat shema ve'itpalel chozer v'chen muchach mipri mekadim b'siman ayin aleph od muchach sham the kriyat shema chozer im birchotea. This is what we said before. Aval b'shar brachot yesh leistapek. In other brachot outside of the Birkat Kriyat Shema, he's mesupak. If you already said a bracha, you have to go back and say the brachot or not. And Mishna Berurah himself paskins safek brachot la'akel in the other brachot. And then he brings Chaye Adam that says yesh la mashmad yesh la'akel b'di'eved gam le'nyan tefillah b'davar da'isur hu rak midrabanan. Even by tefillah, if you daven, you will be mekel with the isur d'rabanan like this. Ve'ayin be'be'ur halacha. Ve'efshar de'yesh litpos kevateh le'inyan zeh. So Harvadia also paskins the same way, but Harvadia adds to this that because you could have fixed the issue, you can fix the issue with tfilat nedava. You could daven with tfilat nedava. It's not like because Kriyat Shema that you say it only once. There's a concept in tfilah called tfilat nedava. I could volunteer at tfilah. Now we don't rush to do that because nowadays we will be very, very, very happy if you could daven our 3 tefillot a day with semi kavanah. We'll be very happy and proud of ourselves. So to volunteer at tfilat nedava when you're not going to have so much kavanah, that's kind of like embarrassing. So you don't rush to do it. But when you have a safek in din, whether or not I was yotzeh my obligation of tefillah, then we do a tenai nedava. Well, it's not tenai nedava. Tenai nedava means you make daven on condition. You say, well, I'm not sure if I was yotzeh because it was nakedness like this, and it's a subject to machloket poskim. So I will offer another tefillah, and I make the following condition. If I must go back, if the halacha is like those who I was now yotzeh my tefillah, this tefillah that I daven should be my chiyuv. I'm making up for what I should go back and make up. But if I was yotzeh with the tefillah that I daven, this should be a nedava. This should be a voluntary extra additional tefillah, And then you should also try to add a prayer for something that you usually don't daven for. Add something into it, and that would basically take care of the problem. So therefore, Chacham Ovadia says you should go back and you should daven al tenai shel netavam, and that would basically cover all of your bases. Now on Ro'eh Ervat Chavero, which is the Ramah added that even if your heart under the cover is exposed to somebody else's erva, will be the same problem. Mishna Berurah says that the case of that would be they're both sleeping uncovered, meaning without clothing, under the same cover, under the same blanket. This is not different blankets. Different blankets would be a second of the blanket. But here is the same blanket and two people. Sorry? It could be, well, it's not only sleeping, even having being alone, even in Even HaEzer Siman Chaf Dalit, we have restrictions on that. I don't want to get into the details of that right now. There are scenarios that will be mutar, certainly. We're not talking about the scenario of Isur. There would be scenarios that would become a problem, but there are scenarios that would be a mutar, right? We just spoke about a person's children, right? This is, imagine a family. How did they sleep? They didn't have like bedrooms necessarily like we have. They had, sheets and blankets that they would put on the floor and they would go to sleep. And, and during the day was the living room. During the night, it was bedroom. And people were sleeping. They didn't have pajamas necessarily, so they would go under the cover and take off their garments and put it by their head. They would wake up and wear them. Right? That's how it was. So you could end up having a father and a son, a brother and a brother that are under the same blanket. They're not necessarily touching each other. Their bodies are not touching each other, but one's heart is exposed to the other's error. It's not. So it could be a very common mutter scenario, but in the way you brought it up, yes, there are restrictions of yichud even, whether it's from Medina or from Qumrah, that the Shulchan discusses in Even HaEzer Siman Chaf Dalet. Okay, so without getting into that, the Ramah brings this restriction, and the Mishna Berurah explains, they're not touching each other. The bodies are far from each other, but it's still under the same cover, and they are not dressed. So therefore, one's heart is exposed to the other's erva, and because they're facing each other, and therefore that would become a problem of libo ro'eh ervat chavero. And the Mishna Berurah finishes up, or they are swimming, right, without swimming suit. Your heart is not seeing your own erva because you are wearing a swimming suit, right? But he is not wearing a swimming suit. Asur afsheinav chutz lamayim. Even though that your eyes are outside the water, we call makom. If your heart is inside the water, is ro'eh ta'erva, and that would become perhaps a problem. Bezrat Hashem, we will continue this in the days to come.